Hey guys, welcome back to another video. It's UEP here, and today I'm joined by my good friend Purple for our weekly podcast.
Hey guys, what's up?
Thank you guys for tuning in for I believe the sixth episode of this podcast. And today, we're going to talk about the race changers that could decide the elections. This is a two-part series. Part one is 5 ways that Donald Trump could win the 2020 election, and then the next part will be the same for Joe Biden. So, Purple, what do you think?
So yeah, this is a very interesting video. Guys, remember, please check out both my channel and UEP's channel. If you're not yet subscribed to one of the channels, please go do so now. And yeah, so we're gonna get through, and this video is gonna be interesting because the election has come down to a point where we were at a very, very high point for Joe Biden for a long time. Now Donald Trump's starting a little bit to make his comeback. It's not complete now. But if these things happen, the things we're going to talk about, these race changers, then Donald Trump may be able to win the presidency.
Yeah, so right now Joe Biden is the favorite. I'd say 2 weeks ago he was at his ultimate peak, and he could get there again because right now he was rapidly gaining in the polls, and Trump was losing all of his momentum that he had coming into the race. Now Trump isn't gaining momentum, but Biden is starting to peak with his poll numbers. So this is good news for Trump, but again, he still has a lot of ground to make up.
So yeah, so we're gonna get started, and we're gonna ask ourselves a first question: what is a race changer, and how does it impact the current status of the election? So UEP?
Yeah, so a race changer could be something it could be a mass exodus of people from a certain party, whether that be the Bernie Bros from the Democratic Party or the moderates from the Republican Party. It could be a third party spoiler. Maybe for a Trump spoiler could be maybe Ted Cruz jumping into the race, although it's not going to happen. And for the Democrats, maybe Bernie jumping into the race, although very unlikely to happen. It could be anything, but something race changing that would definitely shift the outlook of the election drastically in one candidate's favor.
Yeah, so here I definitely agree with you. So a race changer is, I feel like, an event or a series of events that really damages one campaign and really helps out the other. And I mean, one race changer that we didn't mention in this video is the October surprise. So for those of you guys that don't know, every single presidential election in modern history has had an October surprise. So a couple months before the election, usually in October, there is a very big event worldwide or even domestically that really does impact and balances the election to whatever side they wants to balance that election. So, I mean, in 2016, it was the emails. I think the emails were definitely the biggest October surprise. But then you also had other minor October surprises. But each election it changes, so that's the thing we cannot tell, because if we could talk about it and speculate, but there's no real way to say who will the October surprise favor or disfavor.
Yeah, exactly. So Purple is right in that there probably will be an October surprise, unfortunately, and I don't like them because they kind of shift the whole outlook of the race. And it's exciting, but also kind of nerve-wracking because it always does happen. Just every year, and even in midterms, like in 2018, starting in October, Donald Trump he rallied around the country and he talked about the caravans of undocumented immigrants coming into the United States, and it didn't pay off for him, and that's why Democrats are won key races in the South, or in Arizona, they won a big Senate race there. In Nevada, they flipped that seat, and that hurt the Republicans. But in 2016, kind of like Purple said, the then FBI director James Comey sent a letter to, I'm forgetting who it was, but it was about Hillary Clinton's emails and how they were reopening the investigation. That really hurt Hillary Clinton, and it is one of the reasons that she lost the election. And I'm going to go back to one also. In 2004, there was a video of I'm forgetting his name. I think it was Saddam Hussein, essentially talking trash about America in October of 2004. And up until then, John Kerry was leading very narrowly in the polls against George W. Bush, who was unpopular. And this kind of caused a rally like a rally around the flag effect where it benefited the incumbent because people were getting scared again, and they said, I'll stick with Bush, and that is what Bush very narrowly won that election. It came down to a couple thousand votes in Ohio, and whether and like whether provisional ballots were counted, but it happens every October, and it's definitely going to change the outlook of this race.
So yeah, so there's no way to tell what will happen, but historically we know that's usually something that happens. And I mean, let's just be completely honest. This year has been like a complete October surprise. Like, I mean, these candidates when they ran for president in the primaries, or even Donald Trump in 2016, Donald Trump didn't expect probably that he was going to run in 2020 in a public health crisis that's affecting the whole world and the economy. And the Democrats didn't think they will have to deal with that in an election, which at the end, I think this kind of helps out the Democratic Party, just because of the handling and how because here's the thing. COVID-19 is a thing that we're going to talk about this later. I think I shouldn't get into it, but it's a thing that no one knew about. So it's like an October surprise in a sense. So do you want to go on to the next topic?
All right.
So our first topic we're going to talk about today is voter suppression. So for you guys that don't know, voter suppression is when a governor, because usually governors and their secretary of state are the ones that run elections in these states. So voter suppression is when the secretary of state uses tactics. Usually it comes down to race. That it kind of decapitates some of the votes for the other party, especially and usually in the South is the biggest area where we see the voter suppression. So UEP?
Yeah, so voter suppression, I do want to be candid about this. I believe that it is actually happening, and I'll talk about it later, but both parties do it. The Democrats do have a history of suppressing the vote in New York, even going back to the early 1900s. But they don't do it as much or as frequently as the GOP does, and I'm going to be candid about that. In the past few years, the GOP has been doing it a lot more than the Democratic Party, and if it does happen, and I hope it does not, because voter suppression is never good, but if it does happen, it will definitely benefit the GOP.
Yeah, so essentially, we can see very recent examples of voter suppression. Think about Georgia's governor race. So essentially, the person that was running for governor, the Republican, was controlling his own race. So there's many key voters that said their ballots weren't counted because it was some sort of voter suppression. I mean, benefits the Republicans definitely, I would say. And because they're the ones that do it. I mean, and not to say that Democrats don't do it, because a lot of people just generalize, and I think that's bad. But I mean, the Democrats haven't done it that much. I mean, it's the Republicans trying to exploit every single kind of power thing they have, try to exploit them as much as possible, which at the end is not good for American democracy, because you're essentially using power to stay in power. So that's one big thing that really affects the elections. And Donald Trump might benefit from this. If it does happen, it will be unfortunate. And there is North Carolina has a Democratic governor, so no. Georgia especially, Florida has had a lot of voter suppression. And Ron DeSantis has made a lot of these voters' lives impossible for them to vote. So, UP?
Yeah, so going more in depth, that was a very good overview. And so North Carolina is actually interesting because in 2016 there was voter suppression there. Well, I'm going to assume that there was a bit because their former governor was well known for being a voter suppressionist, and I'm assuming that he did the same thing in 2016. And they had a Republican Secretary of State. Now, fast forward 4 years later, North Carolina has a Democratic governor and a Democratic Secretary of State. But so both are up for re-election in 2020. But it's both are going to hold on because both are popular and they're the incumbents. And B, even if they somehow lose, if they're going to be still controlling this election, because this election is going to end, in November, December, not after they leave office. So North Carolina should be crossed off the list of worries for Democrats. But there are some other states to worry about voter suppression in, especially the two states that the purple mentioned, Georgia and North Carolina. So in 2018,
And Florida.
sorry, I said Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Florida.
So I said North Carolina, but Florida is so it'll be Georgia and Florida are the big ones. So Georgia in 2018, kind of like Purple said, many people said that their ballots weren't counted. It's also worth noting that Brian Kemp, who um, he kind of like you said, he controlled his own race. He was the Secretary of State, now the governor, and he denied 50,000 people provisional ballots. And for those of you who don't know, these ballots are essentially ballots that are given if you are unsure, like if you're registered, and sometimes they count, sometimes they don't. They're kind of iffy. He also denied another 50,000 people absentee ballots. Plus, he closed many urban locations, which made the lines longer and obviously no one wants to stand in a line for 5 hours just so they can get their vote cast. And he closed these polling places in very urban regions, which are good news, which are always big centers for blue votes. So yeah, Florida, I don't know as much about the Florida voter suppression, but I do believe that Ron DeSantis actually did have some of his campaign team staff spread disinformation about poll closing times, but I'm not sure.
So actually, just going in a little deeper into these states that usually do it, and I mean, generally speaking, it's in the South because generally speaking, everywhere else, the Republican candidates or the Republican actually secretaries of state, there's like no need for them to go through and like suppress the vote. But the interesting thing about Florida, I mean, and I think yeah, well, I mean, all states elect through Secretary of State, if I'm correct. But I got it confused because Florida elects all of its cabinet officials. But I mean, essentially, the thing in Florida is that Ron DeSantis as governor, he's not Secretary of State or anything. He's just try to bar the felons from voting. So he said that like he's making it a little harder for them to vote. He said that they're gonna make them pay all their court or whatever they had to pay their like fines before they can register and vote. I find that a little fair, but then also that kind of suppresses the vote as well. So UEP.
Yeah, and I don't want to talk about the felon stuff, but background quickly. In 2018, there was a ballot measure in Florida that passed overwhelmingly that gave felons the right to vote, but the Republican-controlled state legislature and Governor DeSantis are trying to, kind of find a loophole in the law, like Purple said. But yeah.
So at the end of the day, voter suppression is something that's really going to help out the Republicans. Unfortunately, I mean, not unfortunately because the Republicans like don't want them to win, because I really don't care who wins. I mean, I would equally want both parties to win, but I mean, with the voter suppression, that's going to hurt the Democrats, especially because Joe Biden is focusing a lot of his time and money in the South. Joe Biden, instead of going heavily onto the Midwest, he's focusing a lot of his resources onto states like North Carolina and Florida, which, if voter suppression is a thing, which is most likely it will, that might hurt his chances.
For sure. And so, yeah, I think just to wrap this up, but
I want to
overall,
mention something else. Hold on. That I wanted to mention that there's some people that think that all 50 states would go red because of voter suppression. That theory is a little bit far-fetched. It could happen because of voter suppression, but probably not. UP?
Yeah. So yeah, I doubt that like the Democrats are not going to vote to suppress in any other like. There's no need for the Democrats to suppress the vote in California or Washington or New York anymore. So, but they could vote to suppress in more swingy regions like Minnesota is already a very gerrymandered state in favor of the Democratic Party. They could start to suppress the vote by playing identity politics. But again, it will favor the GOP if it does happen, and it probably will, especially in Georgia for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and like there's certain areas where Democrats have control and it's going to be a swing state. Essentially, what you're seeing with the GOP, so what they're doing is they're closing or like trying to manipulate the vote in urban areas. What the Democrats are going to do is going to be the complete opposite. Rural areas, there's going to be less polls if the Democrats decide to suppress the vote. So, you want to wrap this topic up?
Yeah, so basically, voter suppression in the South, especially in Georgia and Florida, will hurt the Democrats. It And generally speaking, the Republicans do try to suppress the vote of black voters because in the midterms, 91% of black voters went for the Democrats. So black voters do. So if you're black, more often than not, you're going to be voting Democrat. So overall, it could happen. It probably will, and it'll hurt the Democrats.
Okay, so this was voter suppression, and we're going to go on to our next topic, which is the Bernie Bros. So UEP, do you want to get started on this one?
Okay, so I think that this one is a little bit more far-fetched than our other one. It still could happen, but basically, here's the worst-case scenario for Joe Biden in his Democrats. The Bernie Bros, most of them are going to vote for Joe. Some of them are going to be like, I don't like Joe, but I'm going to vote for him because basically a Bernie Bro staying home is a vote for Donald Trump. And I'll be candid about that. So most of the Bernie Bros are going to go for Joe Biden. But there are a lot of them who are, salty that Bernie lost or that really just strongly disagree with Joe Biden on many fundamentals and who just cannot see themselves voting for Biden. So some of them are going to vote third party. Some are going to stay home. And actually, in 2016, I believe 12% of Bernie Bros went for Hillary Clinton or went for Donald Trump. My bad. So that's a big number, and I don't think we're going to see that again because Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders actually had a pretty good relationship, whereas Hillary and Bernie were a little bit, not as nice to each other as Joe and Bernie were. So it'll probably be something like 5% of the Bernie Bro vote is going to go to Trump, maybe a little less, but the worst case scenario is, Biden gets like only 60% of the Bernie Bro vote, and then most of them stay home, and then the rest stay home, vote third party, and a few vote for Trump.
Yeah, so actually in 2016, a surprising amount of Bernie Bros voted for Donald Trump, kind of in defiance towards the establishment Democratic Party, essentially Hillary Clinton. I would also say that the Bernie Bros, they're a group of people that are very delicate when it comes to voting. It's kind of, they're very picky with their candidates. They don't like a candidate, they don't go out to vote. So generally speaking, these Bernie Bros, they're people who are like do or die. They either get their candidate or like don't vote at all. So that's really gonna hurt the Democrats even going forward because there is an increasingly growing amount of progressive voters which could be classified as Bernie Bros, and that will become a problem because I think that the progressives will not have a majority faction of the Democratic Party not until like a couple decades. So that's going to be hurting them if they continue to go like that. Will that essentially happen? Maybe not, but things can definitely change. And I think Bernie Sanders, he is a very big politician. He's probably the most influential politician in the U.S. right now. Probably him for the Democratic Party and Donald Trump for the Republicans. So, yeah.
Yeah, Bernie, he endorsed Joe Biden, and it is, everyone knows that the majority the majority of the Bernie Bros are going to go for Joe Biden, but some of them are going to stay home, kind of like Purple said. It's do or die, or they either go out in big numbers to vote for a progressive, or they stay home and hope to make try to make a point. But I want to vote for a progressive, not a more establishment moderate. And I think that most of these Bernie Bros, some of them are going to vote for Joe Biden because they like him, but most of them who are going to end up voting for him are going to do it against Trump. And but in a worst case scenario for Biden, as this video is basically about, Joe Biden or Biden would not bring out the Bernie Bros in big enough numbers. Because remember, the Bernie Bros did kind of cost Hillary Clinton the election because Bernie Sanders, he won the primary in Wisconsin, he won it in Michigan, and those were two states that Hillary Clinton lost by, a couple thousand votes each. So, yeah, and if only, a couple thousand more Bernie Bros had come out for Clinton in those two states, they would have both gone blue. And Hillary Clinton, she would have won the Rust Belt with them. So, yeah, they have a big impact on the election, but it'll probably be better than Clinton for sure. But Biden still does need to improve vastly or do a lot better with them than Hillary did, a lot better.
Yeah, so essentially the Bernie Bros are a very decisive group when it comes to the Democrats. If they stay home, it's the equivalent of having the African American community stay home, or having the Latinos stay home. So, I mean, getting out the Bernie bros is going to be enough of a challenge. And I think the Joe Biden campaign will have to put out some resources to get out the Bernie bros to vote. Which actually, if you think about it in the terms of money and campaign dollars spent, that's going to cost the Biden campaign a lot to get most of the Bernie bros. But yeah, I mean, a majority are probably already voting for Biden, but there's still a big chunk of Bernie bros. They're going to stay home, and they're going to require a lot of persuading and a lot of marketing for them to go vote for Biden.
Yeah, so what are their other options? They can vote for Trump, and if a Bernie bro voting for Trump is, I think, definitely not out of policy. It's more out of saltiness, to be honest. But like again, some of them are very little though. But I think that their other options are to vote their party. And in this scenario, in 2016, it was for Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate. 2020, it'll probably be, some are even going to write in Bernie Sanders, and others may just vote for Howie Hawkins, the Green Party candidate, because the Green Party is the most left political party in America. Or they could just stay home and just protest and say, I'm not voting until I have a progressive on my belt. Or some might go to the polls and, say you live in maybe this is random, but say you live in West Virginia and you have a progressive Senate candidate, Paula Jean Swearengin, for the Democratic Party, they'll check the box next to her name, but leave the presidential one blank.
Yeah, so I mean, the interesting thing here is that there's like no major third party candidates. I mean, in 2016, third party candidates were they got a lot more media coverage and they were a lot more talked about. You had Gary Johnson. I mean, he got pretty good chunks of vote in different parts of the country. He got like 5% in Alaska. I remember there was a point on election day that he was actually winning a county, and Jill Stein did pretty good. And don't forget Evan McMullen, who got, I think, second place in Utah, if I'm correct, or they almost.
He got 25% of the vote in Utah, which is huge for him. Third party.
So yeah, I mean, that was shows, but this time around, I think it's either going to be you stay home or vote for Trump when it comes to the Bernie Bros. If they do not want to vote for Biden, most of them are just going to say stay home because that's giving Trump a little bit of an advantage, but it's not giving them as big of an advantage of an extra vote, of an actual vote.
Yeah. So kind of like Purple said, in 2016, just so you guys know, Jill Stein, she was a well-known physician, I believe, from Massachusetts. She had some support, and then there was Gary Johnson, who he was the former governor of New Mexico. He ran as a libertarian. So he actually had, I remember him actually getting out like 15% of the polls, and then he kind of made a fool of himself on CNN. But he kind of, he reached his peak. But this year, third parties aren't going to be talked about. Howie Hawkins is the Green Party nominee, and he'll still get a couple, 100,000 votes maybe, but certainly not as much as Jill Stein. And
yeah. So I mean, this election is going to be very interesting when it comes to Bernie Bros because they're a decisive group for the Democratic Party. At the end of the day, they're pretty much going to support Biden because I mean, a lot of these Bernie Bros are going to say, "Do I rather have Trump in the White House or do I rather have a moderate that might do a lot more of the policies because the actual progressive movement will be a big part of his administration as well." Because I mean, if I was a Bernie bro, which I'm not, I would say, generally speaking, I mean, it's very likely that Biden will have a couple progressive cabinet members in there, and even have very big support from people like Bernie and things like that, which really might help him in his cabinet with the ideas that they wanted to get out. So, I mean, at this point in time, that's a thing they should look at. But, I mean, the Bernie Bros will decide the election for Biden. I mean, if they stay home, it's the equivalent. So, let's say, for example, let me give you an example. If they stay home, it's going to be kind of the equivalent of having a bit lower African-American turnout. It's going to be the same impact. So, I think we should wrap it up with the Bernie Bros.
Yep. So, bottom line, if the Bernie Bros don't come out in, 70% or more for Biden, then that's bad news. But if he gets 75, 80% of the Bernie Bro vote, or even 90%, which is somewhat realistic, then he is going to win in big Bernie. Colorado is a very progressive state. If like say in Colorado, if Biden gets like 90% of the Bernie Bros, he can win the state by 25 points. If he doesn't, like if he gets like 65 or 70%, he'll win it by like 7 or 8 points. So yeah, bottom line, he needs the Bernie Bros, and he needs them to turn out in big numbers for him.
Yeah, so Bernie Bros are going to be very interesting to watch, especially because of how they very picky with their candidates. Nonetheless, let's move on to our next topic, which is, this would be the best case scenario for Trump. COVID-19 improve and the economy improves. So, to be honest, generally speaking, I think the economy was actually doing pretty well before COVID-19. All of this came along, and Donald Trump, then he went down to the ground. It was mostly because of his PR, I would say. His PR with mask and just general handling, which really did hurt him in the polls. And with COVID-19, remember, COVID-19 caused many of the problems we have right now. And that really hurts Trump at this point. If it improves, it's going to give the same flag effect, sort of, quote unquote, because remember, COVID-19 has been a tough time for everyone. And if Donald Trump kind of can change the message instead of being it's a fake virus to we can do this together, maybe he'll get a little bit more support. And if the economy comes back to where it was, it's very possible that the Midwest might consider voting for him again.
Yeah. So, COVID-19 has already dealt a lot of damage to Trump, and he is probably never going to get like a full recovery, but he can recover. And when you think about it, I'm going to be honest. I'm not a huge fan of Trump, so you may disagree with me on this, but he has not acted presidential throughout this. He wouldn't wear a mask. He caused the China virus, which I really think is not needed during these times. And kind of sends off the thing. I don't take this seriously, and this is kind of a lie, and it's all China's fault. And that's not what the American people want right now. They want a leader who they can kind of rally around, who can talk to them every day and tell them, these are the numbers, it's getting better, we have to do this together, kind of thing. Then it's China's fault, and screw China, and don't wear a mask because Max, that kind of thing. So, but just imagine Trump is already kind of starting to change his tone. He wore a mask in public for the first time since March a few days ago. And he could make a recovery, kind of, sort of, I guess. But he needs to start acting because right now he is really just shooting himself in the foot with COVID-19, and unless he turns this around, it'll be very bad for him.
Here's the thing with COVID-19. I feel like it's a little bit unfair for Trump because he is going at a disadvantage. So imagine Hillary Clinton was president, and this is just a big what if scenario. So in this case, Hillary Clinton wouldn't be running for re-election, and if the Democrats say they would have handled it a lot better, but remember, when they're in power, there is no way to tell what they would or have not done. So with the Democratic Party, they're saying, they're talking, but we can't see direct action. So generally speaking, I think it's a little unfair for Trump because the Democrats actually politicized COVID-19 against Trump, actually amazingly. They strategized and they actually made it very good for them. And if you honestly, Donald Trump did shoot himself in the foot many times. Mask, Twitter, and all these different things. No, the economy, the economy I think would be the biggest movement here because, yeah, COVID-19 improves. Yeah, the damage is done. But the economy, if it improves, it could show the Trump campaign and the Trump administration is able to move and kind of get economic crises and flip them like a switch. Remember, in 2008 and pretty much until 2012 about, pretty much, all of America, if not most of it, was in deep economic ruins. So, at this point in time, I think that we could say that a lot of Americans value, and even in 2016, there was a little bit of an economic recession, maybe. We couldn't call it something bigger. It was just a little bit of economic, it was going down a little bit. So, if they want a president that can flip the switch quickly, and we've kind of seen the economy slowly recover. There's just certain extent things can happen. So, I think, honestly, at this time, it's going to be the economy probably going to be moving it when it comes to COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. So the jobs numbers did come out for June 3 weeks ago, I think. and it was better for the Trump campaign. It wasn't great, like obviously still tens of millions unemployed, but it is slowly getting better, but I think not fast enough. However, going back to the best case scenario effect for Trump, best case scenario, he improves and gets it back to like a little bit worse than it was back in January, but still like comparable. Whereas now it's like 10 times worse than it was in January. So he has to do that. Second, I was kind of saying this. He has to act more presidential, and if he does that, it'll look very good because, like, just think about it. Donald Trump has not really acted presidential throughout his presidency, but if he did, it would be a huge change, and it would be very noticeable. Whereas Obama was always very, very eloquent in presidential, and it was kind of something that the American public took for granted. Whereas if Trump did it, it would be a huge stark contrast, and it would be like, oh my gosh, he's being presidential, I'll vote for him, something like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, but then also you have to compare the facts that Donald Trump did not run as the presidential candidate. He ran as
He didn't.
Candidate. So that's a thing to consider also. I mean, his campaign was pretty much based off him being an outsider. So, I mean, the fact of presidential, yeah, it definitely would help, but maybe like the same effect for Trump that he could get in the Midwest for being a little bit less presidential, it would go away. So maybe it's a strategy. I don't know, but I think honestly, compared to past presidents, I mean, he's pretty unpopular. But I mean, also I think unpopularity is something that, like, people say Trump is like completely super unpopular. But I mean, most presidents are in the mid to low 40s throughout their presidency. So I mean, that's where Trump has been. He's gone down and he's been up to 50%. So I think saying that he's unpopular, yeah, maybe he's a couple points unpopular, maybe 1 or 2 points. But I think it's nothing super major that he's like so unpopular compared to what Obama. Obama was like only approved by 45%, something like that. And where's Trump being approved?
His average is 48%, and Trump's is like 41%. So there is a difference, but you are right that neither was like insanely popular.
Exactly. So I mean, people compare Obama and Trump, say Obama was completely so much super popular, which he was popular compared to Trump. But I mean, it's nothing like out of the roof. It's less than a 7-point difference, and an approval, that's pretty much nothing.
Yeah. So I think I'm done kind of talking about this. But bottom line for me, I'll give Purple a chance to wrap this up after me. But bottom line, Trump starts, and kind of like you said, I actually want to touch on that. I think for campaigning, no one wants to even Hillary Clinton said she wasn't an insider, but we all knew that wasn't true. For campaigning, people want to look like an outsider, but when you're a president, you have to, like, in these times of crisis, you have to act presidential. So I think that he doesn't have to act presidential in that regard. For the economy, he just has to do what he was doing before coronavirus hit and before and like when they were having 5% unemployment compared to what it is now.
Yeah, but I think another last thing I just want to mention is that with the economy and COVID-19, it's a thing that we haven't experienced in the past. I mean, and we've never had something like this happen during a presidential election year in modern history. I mean, something completely horrible like this for health and the economy. I mean, both things together, it's 1 and 2. I mean, yeah, we had economic crises during a presidential election. And yes, we've had, that's not modern times, the outbreak of the Spanish flu, but it's a little different. I think it's hard to say the Democrats definitely handled COVID-19 better, which a lot of them did, but there's no way, because a lot of them, like Joe Biden claims he would have handled it a lot better, but then there's no way to measure that. So I think it's being a little tough on the president, but I mean, still, he did pretty bad with COVID-19, which is really going to hurt him. But in the best case scenario, it improves, it does better, he becomes popular because he went through this. And yeah, so we're going to move on to the next topic, which is low turnout. So do you want to talk about it?
Yes. So low turnout is kind of like, it's not good for the country. I like high turnout because, it means that more Americans get their voice heard, which is good. So, so register to vote, go vote, get your voice heard, vote on every single ballot measure you can find, vote on every single, vote in your House district, vote in your Senate race if you have one, vote in your governor's race if you have one, vote for president, vote. And I don't care who you support, get your voice heard. But low turnout does actually generally help the Republicans. So, yeah, in 2016 it was fairly low turnout, and I say this because, first of all, 2016 was more, it was kind of not really super big of an election year. I mean, there was some topics, but like it wasn't as big as 2008 or 2020 is going to be. So yeah, and then second, there were two unpopular candidates who were historically being so unpopular. I mean, Hillary Clinton she was approved of by like 35% of Americans, and Trump is approved of by like 40% of Americans. So they're both not very popular. In 2020, I'll bet a lot of money if the 2020 is not going to be low turnout because of Black Lives Matter, COVID-19 hurting Trump and all that stuff. But in a worst case scenario, it would be low turnout, and we're talking like 55% of the population voting, of the registered voters voting, I believe, and kind of like just lower turnout generally. So, and that does help the Republicans because the people who aren't voting are either getting their votes suppressed or are just kind of younger people who are kind of out of it for politics. So that does generally help the Republicans when there's a low turnout.
Now, here's the thing also, like, I mean, yeah, about the high turnout. So, I mean, generally speaking, we thought going into Black Lives Matter and, like, the peak of the movement, we thought this election was going to be insane with turnout, like, maybe even, like, 80% turnout, something ridiculous like that. But, I mean, since the movement has kind of died down a little bit and it's not as big nationwide as it, like, was maybe a month ago or 2 months ago, maybe just a month ago, Black Lives Matter, I think, is something that's going to move some voters, but probably not a lot. So, I mean, it's going to be, I think, a pretty good turnout year. I would say anywhere from, like, maybe 60 to 70%, which would be actually really high turnout, 70%.
That would be really, that would mean, because 2008, where the Democrats, like, they destroyed the GOP all across the board and had insane turnout. That was only, like, 61% turnout. So, like, anything above that would be historic. And the highest turnout ever, I believe it was 1840, where William Henry Harrison defeated Martin Van Buren, and there was like 75% turnout, which is insane.
Yeah, so I mean, it really does depend. But I mean, turnout is a thing that's just decided by how the voters feel. And this election it's a weird election because I think it's not based off the issues. It's most based off if you're either voting for Trump or against Trump. It's not, because remember,
referendum on Trump.
It's a referendum on Trump, correct. Usually elections come down to popularity. If both candidates are equally as popular or unpopular, like in 2016, it's going to come down to the issues. Most voters, I guess, or voters in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania thought Donald Trump did better with the issues. But in 2020, it's going to be either like Trump or you hate him. And I mean, hate's a strong word, but or you dislike him. So that's going to be what the race comes down to in 2020.
I think Trump is so polarizing that, kind of like you said, I think it'll be you love Trump or you want to see him die. Well, not like die, but like get out of your life, because there are a lot of people who say Trump is an awesome president and I want to see him get 4 more years that he deserves. And there are other people who like get him off my TV. Every time he talks, I cringe and I hate him and I think that he should not ever be president or that he shouldn't have been president in the first place. So it is going to be a referendum.
But I mean, generally speaking, pretty much all presidential elections are that there's an incumbent running is a referendum on the incumbent. So, I mean, 2012 was a kind of a referendum on Obama. It showed that he had lost support in some areas. Yeah, I mean, he still was popular. And, I mean, at this point in time, I think it's a good point to make also that usually before the election season, like during the last year, between like the third year of a presidency and the re-election term, the president becomes pretty unpopular just because of campaign tactics and all these different things. And I think, honestly, it's said Donald Trump is way more unpopular now compared to past presidents. But I think they're being too hard on him. I think he should deserve a little bit more credit for things that he's done. But I understand, like, a lot of people are a little biased against him because they don't like the things he says or things like that. I'm completely unbiased, and I look at it completely like as an outsider, technically speaking, outsider looking in. I know a lot about politics and stuff, but I feel like the president is getting a lot less credit than he actually does deserve. So that's one thing to consider.
Yeah, so I'm kind of done talking with this. But for me, the bottom line is low turnout means that less minorities and less younger voters are voting, which indirectly helps the GOP.
Okay, so our last thing is going to be the third-party spoiler. So 2016 was pretty much also a pretty considerable third-party spoiler year. It wasn't as big, but I mean, I think the biggest third-party spoiler years in history have definitely been, I would say, in part 1992, because it gave Clinton the presidency. And believe it or not, 2000 was a third-party spoiler just because of a ballot design in the state of Florida, which ended up giving a random, I think it was Buchanan, a very not known politician, like a bunch of votes where people wanted to actually vote for Al Gore. So third-party spoilers historically have happened, and it could happen again this year, but it's very unlikely considering that we're so far closer to the election and no one has kind of ran that's pretty notable.
So let's look at history. And like you said, 1992 and 2000. I'm trying to think of other instances. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a way back, 1844. I believe that was the election of James K. Polk, was a Democrat against Henry Clay, the Whig. So just so you guys know, quick history, back in the 1840s, the Democrats were actually the far-right party, and the Whigs were the far-left party. Now that's kind of changed, where the Republicans are the right party and the Democrats are the left party. But basically, in 1844, Henry Clay, who was the Whig nominee, he ran on a platform of kind of containing slavery and slowly removing it from American life. There was a third-party spoiler called James G. Birney who ran a complete anti-slavery campaign and tipped, and then he got, I think, 40,000 votes in New York. Clay lost the state by only a couple thousand. And most of those voters, if not all of them, if Birney had not been in the race, would have voted for Henry Clay. So that's old history for you guys. In 1992, it helped the Democrats this time. Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush, and Ross Perot was the third-party candidate. Ross Perot was, somewhat conservative, but also had some liberal views. But he drew mostly moderate establishment conservatives to his base. Some moderate Democrats, but it was mostly, right-of-center type voters. And that ended up giving the election to Bill Clinton. And Perot didn't get any electoral votes, but he did get 20% of the popular vote. Now, lastly, in the election of 2000, Al Gore, he should have won Florida. But what happened was, kind of like you said, ballot design. And also Ralph Nader, he was the Green Party candidate. And for those of you who don't know, Al Gore is probably the biggest climate change advocate against it, I guess, to ever run for president. Sorry, I phrased that poorly. He was the first person to really talk about climate change and its possible effects on humanity to run for president. And Nader was the Green Party nominee. And guess what? Nader took away votes from Gore in Florida, and there were some studies like even 10 years after the election that shown that a huge majority of the Nader voters would have gone to Gore, thus giving Gore the election. So in 2016, we kind of saw that with Gary Johnson taking away some votes from Donald Trump in New Mexico, Jill Stein taking away some votes from Hillary Clinton in the Rust Belt, but I don't think we're going to see it this year. However, there are some I've been talking for a while, so I'm going to hand it over to Purple in 1 second. But in April, at the end of April, Justin Amash, he launched a run for president. He was actually he's going to run as a libertarian, but he was going to take away more votes from Biden because he was going to take away moderates who are voting anti-Trump. Amash, he actually dropped out of the race like a week after declaring, but that was the closest we got this year.
Yeah, so I mean, Justin Amash was he was going to be a spoiler for pretty much, I think, Biden, actually, in the state of Wisconsin. That's his home state, if I'm correct. And Michigan, right? It's one of the Rust Belt states. And he is a third party. He's a congressman, and I mean that would have hurt Joe Biden because of the moderate vote. Third party spoiler, not likely. I think. If it happens, it happens. I mean, and it's probably going to hurt Joe Biden if Bernie or another Democrat runs. Or even if like a Mitt Romney runs, I think it could hurt both parties. I mean, and it would put the election in play for both parties because Mitt Romney would take moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans. So maybe he could actually win by the. But I mean, that's not the point. So third party spoiler very unlikely, and historically they've happened, but not that much. So I think this is what I'm going to end it here for this topic. And UP, do you have anything else to say?
Okay, so bottom line is it's unlikely in most states of the like no one else can be on the ballot at this point, but in so we haven't talked about Kanye West, but Kanye, he's on the ballot in 2 states, and he's not even gonna, like, I'll be surprised if he gets 500 votes. He's not even gonna take it seriously, and he won't campaign, he won't do anything. So Kanye is not a spoiler for anyone, but basically, bottom line, it's probably not gonna happen. The worst case scenario for Biden would be Bernie jumps into the race, takes away most of the Bernie bros, and basically spoils the election, and it kind of results in Trump getting like half the popular vote, and then Bernie and Biden splitting the rest. Or well, actually, like Bernie would probably get like 20% to Biden's 30%, but still very bad news for the Democrats. So yeah, not gonna happen, but that's the worst case scenario for Biden.
So yeah, I mean, this is very unlikely, and I think this is probably the least likely. So which one would you say out of the ones we talked about, which is the most likely and which is the most unlikely? I think this is the most unlikely, and then I would either say that I think COVID-19 economy improvement is somewhat likely compared to also what was the first one we talked about?
Voter suppression.
Voter suppression. So those two are the most likely to help Trump. Third-party spoiler the least.
I would say, yeah, this one is definitely unlikely, but like I just kind of threw it in here because it's always kind of like it'll just be interesting to like talk about kick around for a few minutes. But the most likely is definitely voter suppression because it has happened historically, even in midterms. It's probably going to happen this year, and then a close second is probably economic recovery.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's probably a good thing for Donald Trump that he's on the road to economic recovery. Nothing is set and done yet. So, yeah. So this was a very interesting video, and I want to thank all of you for watching. So we talked about the importance of the importance of these different issues and how they actually might impact the election by more than people may think. At this point in time, Trump is very far behind. I mean, far behind by a little bit, I guess. Not far behind, I kind of exaggerated that. But he is behind. And these issues might put him over the top. I think, honestly, Donald Trump is going to have so one of the things we mentioned is this is going to have to happen. And, yeah, so, guys, I want to thank all of you for watching. And if you guys haven't checked out UEP's channel, please go check it out. He has a very cool channel. He posts election nights a lot, and he does a lot of sit-down videos about Senate races and things like that. And I would really appreciate it if you go and sub to his channel. So can you help us guys reach to our goals to get 300 subscribers each? UEP?
Yeah, thanks for watching. This was I think 15 minutes long, 5-0, and if you stayed the whole way, that's awesome. We appreciate it. And so me and people really do appreciate making or watch oh my gosh, I can't talk. Me and people really appreciate the fact that you guys watch these, and we enjoy making these. So please subscribe to both of us if you haven't already. Like the video, share with your other political junkie friends, and thank you for watching. So long.
Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to get notified when I post my next video. Bye.
All right, bye everyone.
Bye.